Welcome into episode 110 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Ptacek.
iOS 12 is in the house. Woo woo. Actually, it's on the iPhones and iPads in the house. Changes include new Animoji, new Memoji, and boring security stuff, which is more important than Animoji and Memoji because it keeps you, secure. We're hitting security improvements in iOS 12, privacy and safety changes in iOS 12, and looking at ways that you can get into it. The boys are back in town for this edition of The Checklist. There are a few security improvements in iOS 12 that I know have to make you guys happy. Let's start with some changes to two-factor authentication. Actually, no, let's not start with that. Before we talk about the changes, can one of you remind people what two-factor authentication is?
It's basically a second factor to help identify that you are really you when you're logging into a sensitive account, like your online banking. And basically, the bank is saying your password alone, your username and password alone aren't enough to verify that you're really who you are. So we're going to send you a code either to your email or to your phone with a text message. And you have to provide that special code to us along with your username and password. And that will be enough for us to consider you're really you and you can access the account. So it's an additional security layer that is offered in some instances.
You say your bank is saying, it's not enough for you to just say you're you. Generally speaking, though, this is something that you actually have to do that, right? You have to not physically go to your bank, but if a site offers two-factor authentication, generally speaking, aren't they just offering two-factor authentication? Or are banks actually switching now to requiring it?
Some require it, not all, though. But you're correct. Most of the time, it's just been that a site or service will offer two-factor authentication, but it's up to the user to turn that setting on. There are some services now, especially with some of the cryptocurrency websites, anything that's going to involve the potential for a lot of money to be affected if that account will get hacked, they will require two-factor authentication right from the start in order to even set up an account. But that's not an across-the-board thing by any means.
And some sites will actually give you incentives for having it enabled. One of the business-to-business services that we utilize actually gives us a discount on the monthly fees or service fees for having two-factor authentication enabled.
That's pretty cool. So iOS 12 has made a change that should make two-factor authentication easier to handle. Literally easier to handle. What's the big change?
Well, if you use two-factor authentication and visit sites with two-factor authentication or 2FA on your iPhone, you know what a pain it could be. Think of all those times you've been trying to log into your bank account through Safari or to get access to your account in a particular app. You try to log in to the site and you get a notification or text message with the code to enter. Then you have to either remember the numbers that were sent or swap back and forth between messages and the app. Secure, but not convenient. iOS 12 makes it much more convenient with the new security code autofill feature. According to a piece from Wired, when a two-factor authentication code comes into your iPhone via SMS in iOS 12, it will automatically pass over to the app that's requesting it on screen. So there's no need to switch between apps or copy numbers over. The goal of this feature is to make two-factor authentication easier to use in the hopes of encouraging more widespread adoption.
Yeah, you see, I wanted to save my next question to that part. We talked about, you kind of have to go in and turn on two-factor authentication. We've talked about the fact that it's sometimes a pain. Apple is making two-factor authentication easier, at least in iOS. And I know two-factor authentication is something that you guys recommend.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, like Nick said, banking offers two-factor authentication. Your iCloud account offers two-factor authentication. Sometimes it could be a pain, like when your Apple TV gets logged out and you have to you have to deal with it on that aspect of it. But once you get logged in and it remembers that for a while, you're pretty set.
Now, if all this two-factor authentication talk from us sounds familiar, you must have been listening for a while. We actually did a whole show about authorization and authentication all the way back on checklist number 41. You can, of course, find that show and those notes at securemac.com/checklist. Now, another big security change in iOS 12 has to do with making strong passwords, and lots of strong passwords. What's Apple done here?
Basically, they've strengthened the passwords they're suggesting and making it harder to keep reusing passwords. Not only will Safari's password suggestions be even stronger with a complex mix of numbers, letters, and special characters, but now you can easily identify when you've committed the cardinal sin of password reuse. Now, a piece from TechCrunch says iOS 12's inbuilt password manager, which stores all your passwords for easy access, will now tell if you're using the same password across different sites and apps. We'll cover how to check on that in a bit. What's cool about it is that it catches iOS up with a lot of solutions that are already out there. Password managers have had this feature standard for a while, so seeing an easy way to identify insecure passwords in an iCloud keychain might help motivate you to make a change.
Speaking of password managers, there are changes in iOS 12 for those as well.
Yeah, and I've actually had some personal experience with this one. If anybody else out there uses 1Password or a similar app, you can now actually add your password vaults directly to the autofill feature. So you don't have to switch over to that app and then copy the password and then paste it into the field. The screen will just show you, hey, do you want to add the saved password from 1Password or whichever other manager you have, and you click the button, and it on my phone will do the Face ID for authentication, and then it will autofill it. So it basically looks like Apple is understanding that in order to make security the use of security stuff widespread, they have to make it easy. They don't want to have anything super complex because users don't want to go for that. So it does look like Apple's serious about making it easier for users to get into their accounts in a secure way that is pretty hassle-free. So again, another reason to reconsider the way that you're handling your passwords online.
I'm curious, are the changes in iOS enough to make you ditch a password manager if you already have one? I mean, I can see, like, if you were on a Mac but you're using Android, obviously the answer is no, because a lot of what we're talking about is stuff that's going to be going on inside the Apple ecosystem. But if you're Apple Watch, iPad, iPhone, Mac, is all this stuff enough to make you think, why am I paying anybody else? It's all built into my OS now.
It's starting to, for me, and it's due to the way that Apple actually kind of implemented the autofill password part. When you autofill a password from another third-party app like 1Password, as soon as that password's entered and you're ready to go log into the site, iOS will prompt you and ask, hey, do you want to save this password for the site? And your choices are save the password in iCloud password, don't save the password this time around, and never ask me again for this site. So anytime I'm logging into a site, it's either asking me if I want to basically hand the password over to iCloud password or not have it ever handle that. So I still have to do that for every single different site that I've logged into. And it's getting now after, probably 15 or 20 different sites at this point, and going through that whole process, I'm starting to think about just switching over to iCloud Keychain to stop the madness.
So on top of all of those improvements, Apple went on a big bug hunt in iOS 12, closing loopholes and squashing vulnerabilities to keep iOS devices more secure. Some of the most notable changes include squashing a bug in iTunes and iOS that could have allowed bad guys to create fake password prompts after a user visited a website with the malicious code lurking in it. A fix for a vulnerability that would have let someone with direct access to your device conduct an exploit and view messages you've already deleted. A similar bug that affected deleted notes and even browsing histories. And dozens more garden variety bugs and loopholes that would allow ne'er-do-wells to run arbitrary code, steal data, or access parts of your system that should remain restricted. security isn't the only thing iOS 12 does better than its predecessors. It also takes stronger steps to protect user privacy with a number of new features, including a full rollout of USB restricted mode. If you don't remember what that is, a piece from Wired reminds us, saying with USB restricted mode, an iPhone's Lightning port will lock 1 hour after the phone is locked. In that mode, which will be the default, only charging will be possible through the port after the initial 1 hour period has expired. That means plugging into a device like Gray Key or some other device for bypassing iPhone security shouldn't work after an hour. The Lightning port will only allow charging, not passing information. And we talked a lot about this in episode 88 of the checklist, Gray Key's Anatomy, that one was called. Apple's typically been a bit tight-lipped about these efforts, perhaps because these devices were most famously in the hands of law enforcement. Although, when TechCrunch came calling, Apple said we're constantly strengthening the security protections in every Apple product to help customers defend against hackers, identity thieves, and intrusions into their personal data. We have the greatest respect for law enforcement, and we don't design our security improvements to frustrate their efforts to do their jobs. So USB restricted mode, which sort of came and went in various betas, is officially rolled out now. What are some other areas that Apple's tackled?
Well, Apple's made a few changes to Safari on the privacy front, including enhancements to tracking prevention. Blocking for most tracking cookies has already been a standard part of Safari. iOS 12 is taking it a step further. And going back to Wired, which says, by default, Safari in iOS 12 will block comment boxes and social media sharing icons that can identify you even when you're not interacting with them. Before iOS 12, a Facebook share button on a page outside of Facebook could spot who you are, and it could link the page to your Facebook account even if you didn't share anything. If you were logged into Facebook in your browser, the code embedded in the share button registered your arrival. Now, Wired says, when the browser detects this kind of tracking, it'll give you the option to allow or block it. Fingerprinting your phone will also see new restrictions, keeping trackers from developing a portrait of your specific device and then tracking you through that instead of the use of a traditional cookie.
I don't remember us talking about that term. What is fingerprinting your phone?
I think we have brought it up previously in one of the episodes, but fingerprinting is anything that is done to kind of uniquely identify a device, not necessarily through use of a cookie, which can be deleted by the device owner fairly easily. Instead, it uses things that are typically sent from your browser when it makes a request to view a web page, and stuff like that can include the operating system you're running, the screen dimensions of your device, the type of device, the browser version. Yeah. And sometimes in some browsers in the past, there's been battery level. A sensible reason there was that if a website detected your device had a low battery level, it could scale back graphics or something to basically make a better experience without draining your battery. Advertisers said, oh, hey, that's another data point we can use to try and uniquely identify somebody. So basically what an advertiser is going to do is they're going to look at all this data that's being sent by your phone to try and identify that as, hey, here's Ken's phone. So even if we don't have a tracking cookie on his phone, we know enough about his phone that we can say this is most likely his phone. And what Apple's doing is they're kind of messing with the advertisers there. They're going to send out similar information for everybody. Everybody looks the same. And that way, if every phone looks the same accessing website, they're not going to be able to uniquely identify any single one of those, and thus it's blocking an avenue that advertisers have been using to track users online. So
Apple has control over Safari. Apple does not have control over Firefox for iOS or Chrome for iOS. Of course, they do have control over what gets into the App Store. Are these changes that Apple is making for Safari, are they going to end up in these other browsers? And would that be sort of like those other browsers jumping on board because people like them, or because Apple says, oh, I'm sorry, if you want to play, here's something you have to do?
I think it depends. Firefox or Mozilla has already released their online browser, which specifically has privacy in mind. So blocking advertisers either from fingerprinting or other means is kind of the general purpose of that browser. Google, on the other hand, I know their departments are different. the people who make Chrome aren't the people who are doing the advertising section of Google selling AdWords stuff. But as a company, would they roll out something like that? I don't know, honestly. I think Apple kind of led the way in the past with some of the privacy things, blocking third-party cookies from the start. When they started that with Safari a few years back, was a pretty bold move, and the advertisers got kind of mad about that. Mm-hmm. I think yes, we'll eventually move more towards privacy. I don't know that the other browsers are going to offer it necessarily the same way, unless, as you said, if Apple would offer some way to access the settings for that the non-fingerprinting way that Apple set it up, maybe. But otherwise, the browsers are just going to act like any other web browser and send the normal actual information from the device.
See, I've got to imagine that. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I got to figure it's the more geeky among us that have said, no, I don't want to use Safari. I want to use Chrome, or I want to use Firefox, or whatever, any alternate browser. I mean, because most people who buy an iPhone aren't even aware that they can change the browser, would be my guess. There's no way that my mom, and I know my mom is not every consumer, but I would say my mom is representative of a majority of consumers. My mom's not looking at the iPhone going, okay, Safari is okay, but I really feel much better about, what happens when I use Firefox, or I like the tie-ins for Google Chrome or something. My mom, and I would imagine this is true of most consumers, is looking at the iPhone going, oh, so I just hit that little button and then I can surf the internet, or I can go to the internet, I can go to a website.
But if she uses Google, I mean, lots of people use Google, and then suddenly you're seeing a advertisement because, well, they know you're on an iOS device, and you see this cool ad for this app available in the App Store, and you're feeling like maybe you want a new app on your phone, and then suddenly you're installing Chrome. And it's how they reach out to people, too.
I think it's I haven't, nobody in my family, even including the in-laws who manage to break their computer on a regular basis. I don't know anybody who's actually switched to a different browser. Even on my phone, I think I might have Chrome on my iPhone, and I needed it to go to a website that literally was not loading in mobile Safari for whatever reason. It was just broken. So I think that's the only time I've actually used an alternate browser on my phone, even.
Rounding out the additions that Apple has made, the new group call feature in FaceTime will use end-to-end encryption for total privacy, just like regular FaceTime calls and iMessages. And of course, group calling for FaceTime was supposed to be there with iOS 12, but now it's scheduled to come with an update. And if you call 911, changes in iOS 12 will let your iPhone automatically share your location with the dispatcher, which seems like a great safety feature for a number of unfortunate situations. We'll dig deeper into iOS 12 in a moment, specifically what you can do in the settings and such. But first, a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. If you think having a Mac is all the malware protection that you need, I think you're pulling my leg, because I think if you're listening to this show, you know that's not the case. More and more people are using Macs, which means more and more people are attacking the people using Macs. In fact, the number of malicious files for Macs has increased exponentially over the last decade. Staying ahead of the bad guys is important, and MacScan 3 can help. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac. Shh, they may be listening. Trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Say goodbye to worry, and hello to the comfort of security with MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Have you guys tried MacScan, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Because if you hadn't, I was going to suggest it.
No, I got it on my computer right now, running in the background.
Wow, so you will attest to its attestedness.
I do enjoy it.
So Apple has strengthened privacy and security features in iOS 12. Some of those have to be turned on, while others can be turned off if they arrive in the on position. One that does come turned on is USB restricted mode.
Yeah, USB restricted mode is enabled by default, but if you want to double check and make sure, just tap settings and then touch ID and passcode. On some of the newer iPhones, that will be called Face ID and passcode. And then just scroll down and look for the USB accessories option. It should be disabled. And if it's disabled, that means that USB restricted mode is on.
Okay, so if accessories is off, then USB restricted mode is on.
Correct.
All right. Can you think of a reason or reasons why you would want to turn that off?
No. I guess I was thinking about this after reading the script beforehand. Maybe if I had some sort of USB device that I had plugged in and it just literally was not working with the USB restricted mode enabled, that would be one reason to turn it off, but you just got to remember to turn it back on once you're done using whichever accessory is not functional with it.
Now, obviously, big OS updates we all tend to hear about, but if you want to make sure that you've always got the latest security updates, which sometimes come in like point releases or like 0 point releases, you may want to turn on automatic updates. How would you go about doing that if you want to?
So this one's really easy. Just go to settings, tap general and tap software update. And this feature will basically download and install all of those updates in the background when you're not using the device. So you don't have to remember. You don't have to think about it.
Do you guys do this?
Yes.
Yeah, most of the time, but occasionally when I'm traveling or on other networks and things like that, I turn it off. I had this one time where I didn't realize that an app I was using was utilizing all my travel data on my Wi-Fi hotspot that I had with me, and I burned through all the data while it kept on trying to do a software update. So occasionally I turn it off there, but again, you should be reminded to turn it back on or double check if that's the case for you too.
I got to be honest, and if you guys want to scold me for this, that's fine. I don't have automatic updates turned on, but I also do a daily Apple News podcast. So I pretty much know if an update comes out. And so I'm going to be sort of, just by virtue of what I do, I'm going to be aware of it. Basically, though, I wait at least a few hours so that I can see if reports are coming in that all of a sudden nobody can make a phone call.
Yeah, and that's one thing I will say is that with the automatic updates turned on, it still does prompt you. It'll say, an update's been downloaded. Do you want to install this update now? Or it can do basically it'll try overnight when you're not using your phone. I think it's between like 1 and 5 a.m. or something like that if the phone's plugged in and charging and connected to Wi-Fi. And then the other option is just, ignore this for now. So it does still prompt you, and that is something that I will generally hold off on at least for a day or so to make sure there's nothing super crazy with an update. I always kick myself if I accidentally hit the wrong button and the phone just reboots and starts installing the update when I didn't mean for it to. But
right before we start recording our show, that
has happened before. Didn't that? Yeah, that happened to you. So yeah, it's I'll still keep my eye on it. I don't just blindly install the updates, but I do like the automated nature of it checking for and installing and letting me know, or downloading and letting me know that it's available for install.
We talked earlier about two-factor authentication. While it's great that Apple has it, it still has to be turned on.
Yeah, and with the new autofill feature, there's no good reason not to use it. Tap your Apple ID in settings, then find turn on two-factor authentication under password and security. TechCrunch has one final word of advice as well. Go to settings, passwords and accounts, website and app passwords, and enter your passcode. You'll see a small warning symbol next to each account that recognizes a reused password. One tap of the change password on website button and you're done.
And we're almost done, although there was one thing that I've noticed that we didn't bring up. And I wonder if this is just Apple showing its commitment to privacy and how user data is used. One of the cool things that came out in iOS 12 was Siri shortcuts. And for Siri shortcuts to work, you basically have to, it's got to access a bunch of different parts of your phone, right? It's got to access a bunch of different things on your phone or in your iOS ecosystem so that you can say, hey, personal assistant, I'm on my way to work, and it'll bring up directions on how to get there and maybe, find the best route around, a bad traffic thing or something like that. It'll start playing your morning playlist. It'll, send a message to somebody saying, I'll be there in 20 minutes. It'll do all of those things. But to do all of those things, then it's got to access all of those different things. And even though Siri Shortcuts is part of Apple and your maps are part of Apple and your sending messages are part of Apple, the first time you do all that with Siri Shortcuts says, or Apple actually comes up and says, hey, listen, this app wants to use this thing. Do you give it permission? And it does that for all of those different things, which when I first started trying to use Siri Shortcuts, I thought, that is really weird that Apple is asking me for permission to use the thing that I just told Apple, use this stuff that you make with the information that I've given you to do this. My assumption, though, is that's Apple saying, hey, we're going to be completely above board. We're going to be completely upfront about what it is we're using your information for and why. Do you think that's just, is that trying to, I don't want to say shame other companies, but is it illustrating transparency in a way that they would like to see from other companies?
I think it's Apple being Apple. It's showing that on the inside they have the same commitment to privacy that they're espousing at in the press. They're walking the walk. They're following through on the fact that the commitment to user privacy doesn't just end at their door. It includes them. And as a company, we kind of discussed this in the past, that some of that data is private and is used by other companies for advertising purposes or kind of targeting you for specialized advertising. And the fact that Apple's not taking advantage of all this data that they could have, that their commitment to privacy is so strong that they're going to hurt themselves as a business to an extent in the name of stronger user privacy, that's pretty cool. You don't see that with a lot of companies.
But it's not just asking you if you're giving it permission to do this. You're giving it permission to start scripting with it. You're giving it permission to start ordering your coffee when you leave the house. Like all these tasks that you're wanting it to do. So I totally see the need as well for it to have permission to do some of these things. And I've never ordered a coffee via Siri shortcuts. It was one of the things that they demoed during their presentation of it, but I haven't done it myself. Have you guys?
I work from home, so there's not a thing. Going out for coffee is part of what I'm doing if I'm going out for coffee. So using a shortcut.
Okay, they got HomeKit coffee makers, dude. We could get your coffee brewing before you even step out of your bed.
Yeah, because what I want to do is have everything in my life plugged into the internet. But I think we might have talked about that a time or two. Hey, guess what? This time we actually are done. Almost. First, a couple of reminders. If you want to dive back into these notes or maybe hit the previous shows that we mentioned, the place to turn is securemac.com/checklist. Episode 41, covering authentication and authorization, is there. Episode 88, Gray Keys Anatomy, is there. Oh, sure, I could name them all, but why would I do that when you can find them yourself? SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.